So we've talked about emotions being value-laden somatic experiences. I've encouraged you to experience the full spectrum of emotions. The next thing we're going to talk about is developing a rich emotional vocabulary. Most of us lack a deep emotional vocabulary. Like we kind of walk around with this like Frankenstein approach to emotions, like I'm angry, I'm sad, and we're limited to a few number of emotional words that we use to describe ourselves, which is really silly because, as we all know, emotions are incredibly nuanced and complex and complicated. So I encourage you to paint with a rich emotional palette. If you were trying to draw a picture of the ocean to someone who's never seen it before, and there's the bright orange sun and the deep blue sea and the yellow sand and the black and white seagulls and everything else, and you're trying to communicate that to them in just black and white, and they've never seen the ocean before, they're gonna miss so much of that information, right? They're gonna miss so much of the experience. And when we only have a few very basic words to describe our emotions to other people, that's the same thing that happens. They get this very blunted, black and white, limited version of our internal experience. So I encourage you to develop a rich emotional vocabulary. There's lots of different ways you can do that. One of my favorite ways is using these emotion wheels, where it starts out with these like kind of more foundational emotions in the middle, and then it has all these different variations of them as you go out from the circle. And I had a student once who she pinned this up in her office, and she said every time she got upset, she would come and like pick out which emotion it was, and then go through and find the most kind of nuanced description of what she was feeling. And she said she really enjoyed that because it helped her understand her own emotions better, right? That she was able to really pinpoint what kind of emotional experience she was having. Let me give you a few examples. We use the word guilty and ashamed. We use those words pretty interchangeably, and yet they mean very different things. Guilty is a personal experience. Guilty is when you feel as if you have violated your own sense of right and wrong, whereas ashamed is when you feel embarrassed in front of other people. You feel like you violated society's idea of right and wrong. Even if you feel personally that the action was not bad, everyone else looks down upon it. That's shame. Jealousy and envy, we tend to use these words interchangeably as well, but they have very different meanings, as this meme will help me communicate. Jealousy, or we'll start with envy. Envy is when you want something that someone else has. So he is envious of whoever is dating this girl. He wants something that they have. Jealousy is when we're afraid of losing something that we already have. So she is experiencing jealousy. He's envious. He wants something that someone else has. She's jealous. She's worried about losing something that she has. So again, there's subtle differences in these words, and yet we use them interchangeably. We overlook that nuance in emotional experience. One of the reasons it's so important to develop a rich emotional vocabulary is that it allows us to express ourselves more accurately, more powerfully to other people. We can communicate to other people what our internal experience is, and that is a really important and useful skill. The other thing is that it helps us understand other people's internal states better. That we, when they tell us they're angry, we can be like, well, are you livid or are you furious? And obviously that's an exaggeration. You wouldn't want to do that. But when we have a rich emotional vocabulary, we can help parse out what other people are feeling and really help drill down. And so this rich emotional vocabulary allows us more insight into ourselves. It allows us to communicate better with other people, and it allows us to understand other people. So it's a really important emotional skill. So far, we've talked about how emotions are value-laden somatic experiences. I've encouraged you to experience the full emotional spectrum and to develop a rich emotional vocabulary. The last thing we're going to talk about is making sure not to confuse judgments and emotions, which seems obvious, but people mix them up pretty often. Couples especially have this thing where they'll go to couples therapy and their therapist will tell them to express their emotions more. And they'll be like, okay, I feel like John is a jerk. And they'll put feel in front of it, and this magically makes it an emotion. And you're supposed to share your emotion, so it's actually good for the relationship to say that you feel like your partner is a jerk, right? That is not an emotion. That is a judgment. Emotions are self-focused. They're about what's going on with you as a person, what's going on internally. Judgments are other focused. They're focused on evaluating another person or their behavior. So let me give you some examples and we'll talk about how to tell the difference. I feel like you never keep your promises. This is being expressed as a feeling, right? I feel like you never keep your promises. Well, the way we can check whether it's actually a feeling or whether it's a judgment is to replace I feel with I think. I think that you never keep your promises. That's still a sensical sentence. So that means that it's a judgment. If you can swap I feel with I think, then it's a judgment. The emotion that is associated with this might be something like, I'm scared. You don't keep your promises. I can't depend on you. That scares me. I'm scared that I can't depend on you being there for me when you say that you will. That's the emotion. So I feel like you never keep your promises. That's about the other person. That's about their behavior. The emotion is about you and what's going on internally. And you can see by looking at this why we are so eager to give judgments and so hesitant to talk about our feelings. The judgments are all about the other person. The emotion is about you, and when it's about you and your needs, and when you share your emotions in that way, it's a very vulnerable position to be in. And so we often find it easier and much more comfortable to judge other people and their behavior than to share our own emotions. So we talked about emotions themselves. We described emotions as value-laden somatic experiences. I encourage you to experience the full emotional spectrum and to develop a rich emotional vocabulary, and then also told you to be careful about confusing judgments, which are centered on other people, and emotions, which are about ourselves and our own internal state.